Welcome to another installment of Monday Q&A. I hope you've all had a fantastic weekend and you were able to fill it with lots of wonderful guitar noises. I'm going to toot my own horn before we get into this Q&A and remind everyone that there is a brand new Ragdoll single coming out this Friday. It will be available everywhere digitally. You'll also see a bunch of it on the channel. If you would like to pre-save it or pre-order it, I will put some links in the video description so that you can do that. To everybody who supports the channel by subscribing, commenting on my videos or liking them, and to all my amazing patrons, I have to say a massive thank you as well for keeping the lights on in here. And I always look forward to doing these Q&As. So let's dive straight into it. A cheap and cheerful in-ear monitor system that I would recommend. I did a video a year or two ago now with the X-Vive in-ear system. It's just a mono system, but it's pretty easy to use. Essentially, you have one end that's the wireless receiver. That's like a little cube that you plug your in-ears into. And then the other end essentially has the entire in-ears transmitter built into like an XLR style jack. So basically, you could take the cable that normally goes into a wedge monitor and just plug it into that little dongle there, and you've got instant in-ears and save your hearing. It's mono, which isn't, the most glorious experience once you've had stereo in-ears, but I reckon 90% of the time I play live, the in-ears are mono anyway. So for the money, it's pretty hard to beat. I'll put a link in the video description if you want to check that one out. The enigma of chorus and distortion. Is it better before any distortion or after distortion? Oh, this is a spicy one because I definitely have some preferences. I think if I'm going to have any sort of wobble that's above, 0.5 hertz or something like that, then I like to have the chorus before distortion. Otherwise, it can get way too washed out and just cartoonish. That would be the way I would describe it. So if I was going to go for a kind of really intense chorus or like a Leslie style thing, then I would definitely place it before any distortion. That's just my preference. Even for kind of moderate chorus stuff as like a thickening effect, I think using it the way someone like Zakk Wylde uses their chorus pedal in their rig makes a lot of sense. However, for something more subtle and used as a stereo widening tool, like a Boss Dimension style chorus, I do like it after distortion. Just a lot of chorus pedals don't let you have too much control over the overall depth and mix, and I think that's really important. Like rate really low, depth all the way up, and just bring the mix up to the point where you kind of miss it when it's off is the way to use a chorus in a post-distortion setting. Of course, you can throw all these rules in the bin and do whatever you want, but they are my personal preferences there. So I would say if it was like a Boss CE style pedal, like a CE1 or a CE2, that would go pre-gain. The CE1's cool because you get a dry output. So if you had 2 amps, one can be dry, one can be wet. Pre-gain, I really like the texture there. But for like a Dimension style thing where you do have the left and right modulation out of phase with one another, then that sounds amazing post in stereo. My thoughts on the new Elegant Weapons album with Richie Faulkner and Ronnie Romero. I wasn't even aware that this was out. I really, really like Richie's playing. I first saw Richie playing with Lauren Harris when they opened up for Iron Maiden. What year was that? I want to say 2007 or 2008, the very first time I saw Maiden at the old Burswood Dome. And they opened up and Richie was playing guitar and totally stole the show. Amazing playing. So it was really cool to see Richie end up in Judas Priest. The vibe that I got after listening to a few songs on the album was Dio era Black Sabbath, but the stuff that Ronnie did on the Dehumanizer album, there's just something going on there. It's a little bit darker. It's a little bit heavier. It's cool hearing Richie play those slightly sludgier sort of riffs in there. And of course, the lead playing is fantastic. But I think Ronnie Romero kind of steals the show. Definitely one of the best rock and roll singers going around. And I have to say, I much prefer the way they're using Ronnie's voice on that album than the Rainbow stuff. While I thought the newer Rainbow Reunion stuff was cool, it was like a little bit... it was like they all reined it in a little bit too much. It's just kind of cool to hear Ronnie absolutely cutting sick on that album. So I'm going to give it a few more listens, and thank you for the recommendation. Pretty cool stuff. This one comes from friend of the channel, longtime subscriber, frequent commenter. I always look forward to seeing their comments. Tim, running a chain of pedals where you have standalone overdrive pedals into a cab sim, into a DI for live use. Would I recommend using that, and would it sound good? I don't think there's any reason why it can't sound good. I think one thing that would be, I'm not going to say essential, I think something that would improve the experience from a feel perspective and from a sound perspective, but mostly from the feel of playing guitar, is having some kind of power amp simulation in there. So something like the 2 Notes Cab M gives you IR loading, but it also has a power amp sim in there. And it's actually got little kind of amp sims in there now as well, which is pretty cool. But in all the testing that I've done running like overdrives and preamp style pedals straight into IRs, I always prefer the experience and the overall sound when it's like preamp pedal, power amp simulation, and then IR in there. It gets you a lot closer to the feel and experience of playing an amplifier, which ideally is what you want out of these DI solutions. I think once you start going down that route of using individual pedals and then, power amp sims and IR loaders, it might be worth looking into a standalone all-in-one solution. So even if you were using something like an HX Stomp or an FM3 and you added 2 or 3 pedals to it, that is going to be lighter, more powerful, and probably a little easier to use. Okay, this is something that I see all the time on my videos. I see it on forums. I've had my own students say this, where they say they absolutely love a particular piece of gear, whether it's a guitar or an amplifier or some kind of effects unit. They go, that thing's just amazing. I need it in my life, but I don't think I'm good enough at guitar to have that piece of gear. Like, I don't deserve it or something like that. I can kind of understand the sentiment there. Maybe if you were coming at it from the perspective of this thing is amazing, but maybe it's lost on someone like me. But I think most of the time people kind of use it as this, well, I'm just not good enough to have nice gear. Meaning, because I don't have the nice gear, I'm not good enough. That's really what that means to me. The only thing that stands in the way of you having any piece of gear shouldn't be how well you play. It literally just comes down to whether you can afford the piece of gear at all. That's it. That is the only justification in there. If you've got the money to buy the gear and, eat and do all those other things that human beings need to do, then that's kind of it. That is the world we're living in. So if you've got the money to go and buy a really nice guitar, and playing that guitar makes you happy, it improves the overall experience of your life by some amount, and you can justify the cost to enjoyment ratio, that's it. Don't go around apologizing for your playing or anything like that. Chances are that if you can afford a really nice instrument or piece of gear, you can also afford to go and take some lessons. So use that as the motivating factor to go and get better at your instrument and improve. It's something that I think, I don't want to say this thing needs to go away in the guitar community. That's it. Like, sometimes people just need to be told straight that it's like, hey, no matter what level you're playing at, or no matter what you think about your playing, because I know some amazing guitar players who are constantly beating up on their playing and constantly going, I don't need to do that because I don't think I play well enough to justify it. Again, the only justification you need is like, do you have the cash? That's the world we're living in with anything. And, I don't want that to come across as like this kind of hedonistic, just YOLO, bro, just go and do it. You don't need really, really expensive gear to go and make music. You don't need really expensive gear to be a good musician. All of those things, they're not independent of the gear, but a lot of the time they are less dependent on the gear. But most really good musicians, probably have some pretty sweet gear in their setup, or gear that has a particular character, or gear that maybe they overpaid for, but they can justify it because of the enjoyment they're getting. So yeah, I see that come up all the time. I don't think it will change. I think it is just one of these things that exists in not just guitar culture, in consumer culture, because it is a consumer culture kind of idea that pops in. But keep in mind, if you're playing music or you're just playing guitar because you enjoy it, if it's the way that you unwind, then, hey, cry once, buy once, right? That's the saying, and it holds true. If there's a particular piece of gear that you're holding out on, I think you should probably just do it. Go and get it, play it, enjoy it, go the Stevie Ray route and play it until all the paint is falling off and your fingertips are torn up and you have extracted maximum enjoyment from that piece of equipment. That's my advice anyway. I would love to hear from all of you. Am I just enabling people to go and buy a whole bunch of new gear that they don't need? Or is this coming across the way I intend it to, which is like, hey, work on the playing side of stuff. You should always be practicing. Don't worry about like practicing harder. Just practice. Just get some time in, enjoy it. And also, if you can afford the gear and you can justify the gear, the only person you need to justify it to is yourself. That's it. Speaking of sweet gear, I mentioned the Suhrs ML pickups that I have in my main Strat. Do I know which version of the MLs they are? I have absolutely no idea. I bought them off eBay, slapped them straight into the guitar. I didn't look at the specs. So the next time I restring that guitar, I'll have to take the scratch plate off and actually have a look in there. I'm sure Suhrs have some pretty thorough documentation on their website about it. But for now, yeah, I have absolutely no idea. To me, they just sound good and that's all that matters. But I know there's a bunch of people who might like to try those same pickups in their guitars. So in the interest of actually knowing what's going on, so I can recommend which version to people, I'll have a look at that the next time I slap strings on that guitar. This one comes from friend of the channel, Neil. My thoughts on WA Day here in Western Australia and non-WA Day bands playing. For some context for everybody, you know, Western Australia has this WA Day that they do. It's a public holiday and they put on a free concert. And this year, the lineup had a bunch of Eastern States bands that they would have paid to fly over. So yeah, I can understand the outrage. I think people like to get outraged about just about anything. It's definitely a bad look from the government side of things, where you're trying to have all these programs where you're encouraging the arts, and there's this cost of living crisis in Australia that you're talking about, and musicians need to be paid more, and we need more opportunities for local artists. And by the way, we've got a WA Day festival and these bands from the Eastern States coming and playing. We're not just booking local acts. So maybe I understand the outrage a little bit more on there. So I think when it comes to spending public funds and talking the talk about actually supporting local artists, there is so much more that can be done. In Australia, if it's a sporting event, we absolutely worship the overpaid sportsmen and we worship all the people who go to the ground and do things. But when it comes to like homegrown music or things like that, it's like, oh yeah, you're in a band. How's that working out for you? What else do you do? So I think that's just a classic case of A, Western Australia's inferiority complex, and B, just the Australian culture and how they value music. And, is that ever going to change? I think it's kind of always been like that, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. Now, Australia has always valued international talent higher than our own talent, and in WA we've probably valued Eastern States or non-WA talent a little more highly than WA, because everywhere I play outside of WA, people go, oh my god, there's so many great bands coming out of Perth, what's the deal? I think the deal is that most bands realize that they have to get out in order to do anything, and it's a classic case of no one respects you until you go somewhere else, which I don't know, it's probably not the best thing. I can't really see it changing, but we should hold the people booking these things to account. And I hope next year they learn their lesson in a big way and they just only book WA acts. And I hope they book some WA acts from across the board, not just, the same 5 or 6 bands who they always book for these things so that they can signal to their voter base, sweet. Anyway, this did turn into a bit of a rant, didn't it? Thank you for the question, Neil. I do appreciate it. Feel free to tell me your opinion about all these kind of things. Should music just be a totally independent, self-funded thing, or should we take the model of some other countries where they realize that music is not just a commodity? Realizing that it's actually a very important cultural thing. It's a very important thing for individuals. It's good for your soul. And that should be looked after and that should be promoted. People spend billions of dollars on wellness and all these other things. Music probably plays into that as well. I can't imagine my life without music, can you? On that note, thank you so much for tuning into this Q&A. I really, really hope you enjoyed it. If you've got questions for next week, let me know in the comments section below. I hope you all have a fantastic week. Go and make some guitar noises, go and enjoy some music and be good to one another. And I'll see you all next time. Cheers.